Win. Strategize to Win by Carla Harris is our book. Super tactical, super actionable. It was a lot different than I expected it to be, but in positive ways. I thought it was going to be more like, I don't know, philosophical. And instead it was like really tangible stuff, which I always dig. Jeremy already put it on his great list, which for folks that aren't as active in Slack, he has his, what is it? Great, good, and like, okay.
Mediocre.
Yeah, great. And this made the great, and there are very few books that make it all the way up to great. So I was happy to hear it. We are joined by like two of my faves. Scott even pays me a little bit of money. He likes hanging out with me so much to work with him and some of his clients. And then Larisha, I don't even know how we met. I think we're just kindred spirits, and like now we are like TikTok and LinkedIn besties. But very excited to have the two of you join to help lead this discussion. Do you mind popping off mute and just saying hello, introducing yourself? Larisha, do you want to start?
Not really, but I'll go ahead. Leslie, I don't know if you know, I'm super shy. So.
Well, then this is a perfect small group setting for you.
Yeah. Okay. So, hey, yeah, I'm Larisha. Leslie and I actually met on LinkedIn. I was completely just obsessed with her. And then finally I was like, I got to reach out to this lady and tell her I'm just crazy about everything she's doing and saying. That was just real. So I'm super excited to be here with you guys. And I'm super excited that I read this Strategize to Win. I didn't even know anything about Miss Carla Harris. So I'm very excited that I guess Leslie introduced us.
Amazing. We are so very happy to have you here.
So hi, I'm Scott Sambucci. I'm the founder, and what I call myself is the chief sales geek at Sales Qualia. So we're a sales coaching company that works specifically with early stage B2B tech startups. So we're based in Northern California. We have clients all over the world. We basically help them build repeatable, scalable sales processes. And that's why I know Leslie, because she was introduced to us by another one of our coaches, Megan. And with Leslie's zone of genius around prospecting and outbound and all the things that many startups need to learn, I asked, and she so kindly accepted the opportunity to come in and coach our clients a couple times a month. So she runs one of our most popular coaching call sessions every month. And I'm here because, well, first she invited me, so I try to do anything that Leslie tells me to do. And secondly, I've never actually done a book club. I've never been in a book club meeting ever before.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah.
Okay, so many thoughts. First, I always like to celebrate the fact that as adults, it is actually like so very, very rare that we get to have first, like experience first, right? Like it is. And even if it's something that like might feel kind of insignificant, like a book club, I just think like celebrating doing something for the very first time as an adult is also like always very special. So congrats, kudos. And many of you met Megan because she was here for the book I did with Dale and Nikki. Oh, I can't even remember the name of it. Jeremy, what was the name? The time management one that I didn't like.
Oh my God.
Check the mediocre list.
Yeah.
It was definitely on the mediocre list.
It's on the list, but I have to go back and look.
I can picture the front of it. It had like a carrot and a stick. It was black. The guy's name was Jeff. I don't know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. It was a 6.5 out of 10 for me, folks. So don't go back and read it. You can just watch the update. And Larisha, I was also thinking you would not have enjoyed my week. Last week, I was on site with Scott and a bunch of his clients leading some workshops, in-person workshops. And as many of you know about me or maybe have gathered, I'm like a chronic over-preparer. Like that's what gives me the confidence to speak in person. And Scott is he's becoming a really good influence on letting me just let go of that perfectionism a little bit. Like just like show up and knowing that I have the expertise and letting that be my confidence. And so I really leaned into that last week and it went, I would say, well. He's nodding his head, so.
You're a superstar. It was, so let's put it this way. We had like 30 people in the room and they had options to go spend time with me, spend time with the co-host of the event, Amy Volas, or spend time with Leslie. And we had these 3 breakouts. And like 5 people went to talk to Amy, 0 people went to talk to me. And 25 people went to talk to Leslie.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, now I know where I stand in this room. I'm good with that. And she ran 2 different sessions. They were both like people all huddled around this whiteboard, and she was running her magic. And it was really great to have you there. It was super great infusion of energy that we needed in day 2. So thank you, Leslie.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. But enough about me. Let's talk about all of the wisdom that Carla shares in this book. Okay, first, Larisha, you mentioned that you listened to it. Did anybody else listen? Okay, a few people. Okay, amazing. So I read it, but I always think that when books are narrated by the author, it's like an extra special book experience. So I'd love to just start there and like, what was it like to hear her narrating her own bits of wisdom?
So this might sound kind of naive, or I don't know, but for me, it was like having my own little personal mentor for a minute.
Yes.
It was like, I almost felt like I knew her. You felt the same way, Larisha? Like, I really did. I felt like she was sitting with me, like, and we were talking, and I kind of needed that this weekend because Friday afternoon was rough. Not anything with Lauren's show after that. So I was like listening to some of the things she was saying on Saturday and Sunday, and I actually teared up a little because I could feel that connection because I was able to hear her voice.
Larisha, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, so she actually like checked me a few times. So it was kind of like a back and forth dialogue where at one point she was like, and if you have an issue with your manager, you should say something. I'm like, no, don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. And then she's like, you should say this. And I'm like, oh, I wasn't going in that direction. Maybe you can say something if you put it like that. And so it was just kind of like a really good back and forth. And it definitely felt like having your own personal mentor dropping all of the gems.
100%. There's something I have it in like one of the questions I have typed out that I want to cover. But I felt called out by this book in the right way. Like the level of accountability that Carla just demands that we take for our own careers. I was like, okay, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I totally should be doing those things and have no excuses. So yes, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I want to skip ahead a few chapters. I know the book is kind of set up for like starting your career, escalating or stepping up in your career, and then starting over. So I'm gonna jump ahead to chapter 3, because I think I just generally want to get the take on this. Carla says that, or there's like a whole thing in chapter 3 where if money was no object, what job would you do? And I don't know, did anybody else go through that whole exercise of like what, or like kind of parts of the exercise, like what would you do if money was no object? Okay, I would love to hear what other people came up with, and you can come off mute and shout it out or just drop it in the chat. But I'll show what I landed on. I landed on that I would read and write. Like those are my favorite things. And if I could make like that tech sales money and doing it just being a creative, I would, which was kind of shocking to me because I was literally a person until a few years ago that would say things like, I'm not creative. Like I'm not a creative person. And then a few years later, I'm like, well, if I could do anything, I guess I'd be a creative for a living. I was like, oh, okay, Carla, thanks for uncovering that. Yeah, what did other people come up with? Let me open the chat here. Safari guide, Courtney, and so many questions. Take people on hikes and safaris. I love that. Scott, what did you come up with?
Similar to what you came up with, and this is something that I've actually been working on this myself over the last couple of years, is not necessarily reading, but writing and speaking. So in our business, because I have a team around me, a lot of the times we focus on what are the things that Scott should be doing. That's kind of what we call our zone of genius.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, it always goes back to like writing and speaking are the two things that I love to do. And it's the time where I lose track of time. Even if it's like a goofy LinkedIn post, I'll spend like 3 hours on a 300-word post, just editing and
No.
re-editing. And I'm like, this is great. And then I hit publish and I'm like, wow, I actually did something productive today. I published a post. It's almost like if I cut the grass, which I never do, but when I was a kid, I used to cut the grass and it was always a pain in the neck. Like, well, at least I can say I cut the grass and they're shorter than it was an hour ago. But that's about the thing about writing is just getting into that sort of zone and thinking through who's reading it, what words to use and rearrange stuff and cutting things down and adding to it. And the same with speaking, it's creating the presentation. So Leslie, when in preparation for that 2-day event, I mean, I spent hours just working on slides and images and what I was going to say in what order, and, you know, hours just flip by. And when I'm doing that and you kind of like come out of a little bit of a trance and you're a little bit exhausted and you can't work it on anymore, but you feel like, man, that was awesome. I wish I could do that every day, but oh crap, now I have to go do 3 Zoom calls. Damn it.
Yes, it's that like that flow state
Yeah.
that is so nice. And I see, oh, go ahead, Allie, please.
I was just going to ask a follow-up question because I'm the curious person who asks a ton of questions and I'm new here. So
Yes.
tell me to shut up if I'm asking.
No, never.
But Scott, is the zone of genius, my ears honed in on that. Is that from Patrick Lencioni's the 6 types of working genius model?
I didn't get it specifically from him. I learned it from a guy named Dan Sullivan, who's been around probably longer than Patrick. It's a concept, you know, zone of genius, or, you know, the thing that you just sort of get lost on. It's the thing that you do better than anyone else in your organization and the thing you love to do.
Yeah,
So,
I love that. And organizing people toward that.
We're trying to organize your day and your week around it as well.
Okay, well, Allie, while you're off mute, what would be your if money was no object thing? What would you do?
Mine would probably fall into something similar of reading/writing in the creative, maybe coaching, but probably chef.
Ooh.
Yep.
Ooh, that's a good one. I follow way too many like professional chef for rich people accounts on TikTok.
Yep.
Their Erewhon hauls are concerning and alarming, but I'm like addicted to the content. Okay, I love that. A chef. And we have some good ones in the comments too. Hannah said teaching children how to create. I love that, Hannah. All the feels there. Liz, reading and helping people grow. That's incredible. Larisha, what would yours be?
I feel horrible. It's not none of this. I would be, money is no object, and I am a barista. No one pays me. I got a new coffee maker this weekend, finally, my dream Breville. And I'm a bartender. No one pays me, but I make incredible drinks. And generally, I love to just create experiences and watch people experience the experience. It just makes me so happy.
Oh, that's so powerful. It's interesting that it's a bit of a, like all of us sort of went a creative direction, like our own sort of zone of genius with creativity. But all of us want to create something that we can share with other people. That's powerful. I love that. Jeremy over here added structuring and orchestrating systems and cultures. Oh, so those who will often lose their dignity will keep it. Jeremy, that is meaningful. You said it in like a very business language sort of way, and then it took like a really sharp turn to like really in the heart. Yeah, do you want to share just a bit about that?
Yeah. So I work in contact centers, and you know, I'm a child of abuse. I was abused as a kid, and I saw the loss of dignity on my face and my brother's face regularly. And when I got my first real job in a contact center, this lady sat next to me, Teresa, who was in her 40s or 50s at the time, seemed super old because I was 19. Like she called me sweetheart every day, and I call my kids sweetheart because of her. Like she listened to me, she cared about me, I was important to her, and we were in an environment where we had 600 or 700 calls a day. People had to call out sick to work to get their email password reset, right? So everybody was mad. And nobody ever escalated on Teresa because she was such a doll. And I hear my supervisor one day yelling at somebody in the aisles. I turn over and he's yelling at Teresa. And the look on her face was the same look I saw my brothers and I when we had been abused. And it wasn't that the supervisor was a bad person. It was that the contact center was structured in such a way to strip people's dignity away. Because he was under that negative pressure because she was out of adherence, right? Because we had all these calls in queue. So I do that today in our contact center here at Hunter Douglas to help people keep their dignity. And, we've cut our attrition down by almost 70% because of it. But any place I can go just to help people hold on to that dignity is important because, yeah, we all need to perform. We need to do a good job, but we're all still people too. So that's my thing.
Like really rooted in empowerment, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's a right way to do it. And it's typically, most behaviors are the byproduct of the system, not the byproduct of good or bad people. The system set people up for it, right? Like any kind of prejudice or whatever, like typically it's systemic. It's the system set up to be that way. And people's behaviors are more often the byproduct of the system they're in than their own choice. And you find out what that piece of the system is. Like Wells Fargo got in trouble, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago, with those thousands of people committing fraud on the account. Do you really think Wells Fargo found like the one place to recruit thousands of morally bankrupt people? No, they just had a system that caused that behavior. And I initially wasn't that way. Initially, I was just championing people like, I'm going to just go stab all the evil people. Well, punching Nazis doesn't work, I've learned. So this is my passion.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. I was telling before everybody joined, I was telling Scott and Larisha that last session, a couple of us cried and they were like, what are you doing on book club? And I was like, hey, it gets real. Like we get real and authentic here. Okay, amazing. Okay, so staying in chapter 3 for just a second. I mentioned that one of the things that stuck out is how actionable this book was. Like I expected it to be philosophical, and Carla was like, absolutely not. I'm going to give you specific strategies. You need to be accountable and start applying them now. On page 70, Carla says, when companies are preparing their expense budgets, they include numbers that are consistent with market rates. The bottom line is that they are prepared to hire you at market rate, but if they can do so at a cheaper rate, of course they will. That makes good business sense. Would you pay people more than you had to if you were in a similar position? And this book was written in 2014. And it was a moment of, I'm gonna sense check this with all of you, but it was a moment for me of being like, oh, wow, I really feel like the shared experience of what's appropriate in terms of paying people and pay bands and market rate has shifted in the past few years. I don't know, Scott, I'll come to you first. Do you feel like the approach to hiring and maybe the approach to like knowing what you're worth and how you negotiate salary has changed a little bit since Carla initially wrote this book?
I mean, I can speak for somebody who's hiring all the time, and as somebody who owns a company, I would say it does. And in our case, we actually find that we would pay in some cases lower than what people would consider like the numbered market rate in exchange for freedom or in exchange for flexibility. So like Amy, Amy, she's our head of operations and she's got a fantastic background, but she just doesn't want to work full time. She wants to do like 25 hours a week while her kids are at school. She's phenomenal at her job. And she just loves having that flexibility to say, I'm going to be done at 2:00 East Coast time every day, period, done. And sometimes she'll make herself available if necessary, as well as being able to say, look, I'm going to take Friday off, or I'm taking 2 weeks off to go back to London. And she's cool with that. And I'm cool with that. So being able to know like, okay, it kind of sucks for me when the head of operations is gone for 2 weeks. But on the other hand, it's like you also get a really world-class person for less than market, because in exchange for not having to pay market rate, they know that they value their flexibility and their freedom as well, which then has carry-on effects for their families as well. Knowing that their family's like, wow, it's really great that mom's home in the afternoon to pick up the kids because dad's taking them to school and those sorts of things. So I've just found that people in general, the market rate is kind of like an older way to think about it. It's more around what do people value in a more complete view of work now that we're in this world that we've been in for the last 3.5 years.
Ooh, that's a powerful take. Almost like instead of showing up to an interview thinking this is what I need to get paid, having more of a view of these are the things that are most important to me.
Yeah.
And maybe pay is actually number 3, and number 1
Yeah.
is flexibility, and maybe number 2 is professional or whatever it is for.
Yeah, development's a
for
big thing
you.
as well, right? Like, so Jalen, who's our salesperson, he had offers that were slightly higher than what we offered him, but he's like, wants to learn how to be a professional salesperson. So he can go work at some big company be one of 10 people that reports to a manager, that reports to another manager, that reports to a VP, that reports to a CRO, or you can come work with somebody who's done sales coaching for the last 10 years and has had a successful career, and he gets to learn all the stuff that we teach to our clients. So he's like, he told me after we hired him, he's like, I knew after the first call I wanted to come work for you guys. He didn't tell me that. He held his cards really close. But afterwards, he's like, I knew, like, I was definitely going to work for you. I was like, that's awesome. Because that's what you want. The value for him wasn't necessarily just dollars. It was professional development in his case.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Larisha, what do you think? Has sort of the approach to hiring and pay changed since Carla wrote the book?
It's definitely changed. It keeps changing, right? Because what we're dealing with today is different from what we were dealing with 2 years ago. And she talked about, discussing your current salary, and that social media guidance, mentorship 101 is you don't tell your prospective employer how much money you make. That's not a thing right now, right? But for me, I lately think about, because I hear a lot of people talk about my worth, my value. And I just don't know if we ever stop to think about what our value was. I think there are certain companies who set the standard, and that wasn't about you and it wasn't about your value. It was about them, their mission, and what they were willing to pay individuals in order to execute on their mission. And somehow we took that as our individual value. And I was like, I don't know if we ever sat to think about what our skills were worth.
Yeah,
So,
that's smart. You also make me think of like listening to maybe younger millennials and Gen Z, is that they talk a lot about their worth, but I think often fail to acknowledge that like that might not be worth anything to the person they're trying to sell it to.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a disconnect where they're like, well, I feel like I should make $200,000. And it's like, well, I feel like you've done literally nothing to make that salary worth it. It's like that parlays so well into the next sort of question I had mapped out, because a few pages later, Carla says this is what a good career, like a good corporate career would look like. And like I so often, I talk to a lot of SDR, sales development reps. So generally those are folks in that first, like 1 to 5 years of their career. And often after like 18 months, 2 years of being in that sort of like entry level, ground level role, they are furious that they are not managing an entire sales team, because they've been doing the job for 18 months and they know the stuff and they should be in charge of the team. Which I get where they're coming from, but I don't think that's necessarily true. But it's like also a real disconnect from what Carla has outlined here, which is like, 3 to 5 basic skills, and what they think they should be achieving at like 2 years, 3 years is what Carla says they should be aspiring to achieve at 8 to 10 years. And I think the other place I went when I was reading this is that with how crazy the world has been in the past 3 years, and a lot of folks have left corporate and gone into entrepreneurship, or at least they like have a passion project, a side hustle. They are offering that like expert advice, but they are doing it with 3, 4 years of experience. Like
with none.
Carla says like they've just acquired those basic skills. So I mean, I love Gen Z. I'm not picking on Gen Z. Like, I genuinely think they're an
I'll
amazing
pick on 'em.
generation. But like, how do you feel about career pathing in general in the post-pandemic area with Gen Z entering the workforce? Marisha, you're like chomping at the bit to say something.
No, because like first these coaches, they get me, they drive me crazy. I'm like, baby, what you coaching me on exactly? You have okay, I guess. But I also have a 17-year-old who
Mm.
I'm crazy about him, but I'm like, bro, you got to do some actual work. Like, and I had a conversation with someone and they're like, but would you do that would you work just as hard if you knew you could still get the same amount of money? And I'm like, yeah, because I'm old now and I don't work hard now and I don't want to work hard now. But when I was young, I was working 90 hours a week and that allowed me to build a very strong foundation. And that's how I do it in my sleep. Not because I just wake up like, hello, I do this in my sleep, pay me. Like, no, I was able to build that over time from putting in the work. And so I just hate to see the younger generation not interested in putting in the work and somehow believing that they'll be strong, have this very strong foundation. And it's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this topic a lot. It's come up in some of my circles, and my workforce is all the way from straight out of college to ready to retire. So dealing with these issues comes to mind. But one thing that in thinking about Gen Z that I've noticed and in my research kind of have noticed as a trend is Gen Z is coming into the workforce without work experience. I think for my generation and probably the preceding years, high school years included some type of job and some type of work experience. So coming into a job without some of that background, their expectations might be off. And maybe there's some learning curve to account for in what they need to be aware of before they go putting that value on themselves. But what do you guys think of that?
I think that's a powerful insight, because who here had a job like in high school or had to work in college while they were putting in like every single person, right? That is not something I'd ever thought of before, but you are so right. Oh, very interesting, Allie. Scott, what were you going to add?
Well, I was kind of looking at these time horizons and I was kind of trying to matriculate my own work experience. So basically like 24, I had my first managerial position, but it was in a really big company. I had 2 people reporting to me. And it was basically like a situation where my manager was really trying to make sure I wouldn't screw up. And it was just like a big hierarchy. So there's like no way for me to screw it up kind of thing. So I don't really count that as management. But then I got hired to work at a startup, which has got me out to Silicon Valley. And I was like 28 and I was managing like a small sales team. And looking back, like I would never hire me then to do that job. I mean, they must have been either crazy or desperate because I was not qualified to be a manager. I didn't have enough business maturity and I didn't have enough emotional maturity, because I think that's the other thing that's not included in all of this is like, I'm 28, I'm living in San Francisco, I'm by myself, and I'm making at the time, this is in 2002, I'm making $100,000 a year. So I'm like, I'm rolling in dough, and I'm going out every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night with my buddies, and then sometime on Tuesday. And I was decent enough at my job, but like emotionally, I wasn't looking at this job as my main priority. It was like a way to it was a priority and I wanted to do the startup thing and I wanted to be successful, but it was also pretty interested in going out on Friday and Saturday and Sunday as a 28-year-old single guy in San Francisco. So, you have to also look at somebody's emotional maturity as part of the arc, because it wasn't until really I was in my mid 30s or so, like after I got married and then start to realize like, oh, this is the way you're supposed to live your life, that all of the other things start to sink in. So for me anyway, personally, I don't feel like I was really capable of managing anybody until I was in my late 30s. So
But
that's,
you did.
What's that?
But you did.
I did, but even I'm comparing that to some of these timelines that she has. I think 10 years, like if you start working when you're, call it 24 nowadays, in 10 years, when you're 34, are most people really, do they have enough experience and enough diversity of experience in different roles, different size companies, different organizations to be able to take that and then run a division based on her parameters, I'm like, maybe not. It would really take a superstar in my
Yeah,
mind
Scott,
to be
that's
able
a
to do that.
great point. And as kind of we just talked on like Gen Z and like the people coming up, I think about their experiences in more of a virtual setting and less in a human, and how that's affected some of those emotional and relational development issues. So how do you think about training the next generation of leaders? Because I have to imagine that's part of your business in coaching that up. How do you think about developing that when there isn't some of that starting basis?
Very slowly hire people, first of all, to make sure you get, good people that are coachable and trainable. And then at least within our company, we use this concept called the helpful hierarchy, which I'll put the blog post in here. And this is something we use, and Amy, our ops person, uses all the time with our team to say, like, if you've got a problem that you've uncovered in the business or with clients or something else, like try to follow this hierarchy. So you're not just like, hey boss, there's a problem, and then just creating more work for me. It's like, how do you help people become aware of potential solutions, making recommendations, and even implementing some things in a way that they can start to take more and more ownership over time? And so it's hard to teach this, especially in a remote world, because you don't have the direct, like, quick feedback loops. Sometimes the feedback loop is a week or a month or more, when if it was in a real office in real time, it would be like a day. But that's something that we use as a mechanism to help coach and get people to take more ownership so they can continue to step up.
I like that. Thank you for dropping that. And I feel like my entire career I've sought to find people that just can be proactive in finding solutions, like proactive problem solvers. That's all I ever want. Liz, did you come off mute? What were you going to add?
I was just going to say, it's a different way to say it, but it's the same concept. So I actually started out as an educator, and my first principal, who was one of the best bosses I ever had, she had a sign on her door that said, "My door is open, but if you're going to bring me a problem, come prepared with solutions."
Ooh.
So every job I ever went to, I took that lesson with me. And when I would, when I talk to my mentees now, even though I'm no longer in education, I mentor some students. And when I talk to them, and they're struggling with a professor or a coach or a boss, I always give them the advice to bring a solution to that conversation. And that's going back to my very first boss.
Hey, good advice doesn't time out.
That's actually the first time I learned about the helpful hierarchy was not directly named that. When I was at Pearson, which was that large company I was first working at, my manager, I was doing that to him. I'd say, man, it was brand new, the new job I got promoted to, and he was a new manager. I'm like, Steve, what do I do about this? What do I do about that? And he was the one that introduced me to the concept of like, hey man, every time you come in the office with a problem, at least have 3 ideas and a recommendation. Just because I just need you to start figuring this stuff out on your own. So to his credit, like, he was a really good manager who took the time to train me. And I didn't know it was called the helpful hierarchy until I found this article like 5 years ago. But that's what he was doing. So
I like that. Something else that you said, Scott, that I think would be interesting to stay on for a second, because Carla talks about it in the context of the performance currency, is like the intellect, experience, strong execution, but it's times multiple occurrences. So it's like, I think about myself as a like 20-something manager. I was in a management position with 4 directs after 6 months in my job. I was a shit show. I was also like fresh out of Montana in Chicago, like living the life I've always dreamed of living. When I tell you my job was not, like, getting a paycheck was a priority, but like my job was not my priority. And almost everything that I've learned that makes me such a good coach and manager now, I learned by getting deeply wrong as an early manager, which, it's hard to think about, but that I'm sure had a cost on other people that had to be like my training ground, which, I mean, I can't put too much fault on myself. I'm not the one that promoted myself, but like there is a cost to that. I mean, my job is not my priority. It's never been my priority, but there's a difference between it not being my priority and me being like waiting for the day to end so I can go to happy hour. Like there is a balance. I think.
Right.
But here's a really good question, because I know that the book, it's like beginning, middle, of end of careers. Thinking about all of us who are somewhere in the middle of our career-ish, and many of us still work for somebody else. Like what's your advice when you have the intellect, the experience, the track record of success, and you are still struggling to get folks to take a chance on you? Like, what advice would you give to folks who are checking those performance currency boxes, but still struggling to land their next role? Anybody on this one? It's not an easy answer. Yeah, Pam, what would you add?
I would reach out to like someone that knows somebody in the role that you want. Start partnering up with people and, doing a little bit of networking, get that warm introduction, that nice handover. I think that's one of the best ways to do it.
And you might even find out that the job you thought you wanted, you don't actually want when you start talking to somebody who's doing it. That is very true.
Exactly.
Jeremy, what were you going to say?
Yeah. One of my favorite authors, Nassim Taleb, wrote Fooled by Randomness. And a big tenet in there is we assign meaning to randomness all the time. And we assign randomness to what's actually sorted and shuffled. So what I'm getting at is we can be actually very good, but just didn't get the opportunity or happened to miss the one opportunity that was out there for us. And it's just that we missed the opportunity. And oftentimes, and there's a buddy of mine I'm thinking very specifically of who's a linguistic genius. Like he knows how to write copy to where it just goes in and out. You don't have to be a good reader and you know what he wrote, right? And he's one of those folks, and he just hasn't had that opportunity. And typically what happens is they beat themselves up, they think less of themselves, they don't want to give it a shot. So I'm echoing Pam to say, don't effing give up, right? Like there are opportunities for you. You just haven't had the right one yet. They're still out there. Those cards aren't stacked against you. Just keep going because you've got something. It just hasn't happened yet.
Powerful. I generally shy away from sports analogies, but very much like you simply haven't had enough at bats yet. Like just keep going. If you're checking the boxes on the performance currency, then you've done the work to achieve the outcome that you want. You just gotta keep having those at bats. Yeah. The reason, what were you gonna add?
Always 100%. That has always been my experience. And so for me, and Jeremy, I used to work in a call center. Call centers are near and dear to my heart. I love the call center space. For me, it's been don't stop, get it. Don't stop, build out your network and continue to meet people. But if you need to, make it up, make your own lane. And so like when I was in the call center and I really wanted to get into process improvement and I could not get an opportunity, I started making up projects and I just started doing things and I started adding those things to my resume. And when I really wanted to do something in the consulting space and I couldn't find anyone to go work with, I started Yellow Bag because I'm like, no, I'm going to do what I want to do. And I can keep asking and be upset or sad that I'm not getting those opportunities, or I can just make the opportunity for myself. And that's worked out for me. It's not easy, but if you have all of the boxes checked, sometimes you're going to have to just make it up.
Same friend. I was like, oh, you don't want it? I'll take it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, could I add to that?
Yeah,
because I think, this idea of at bats, especially in today's world, there's so many opportunities to create those at bats for yourself, whether it's like regularly posting on LinkedIn or getting on Twitter or, creating videos or TikToks or whatever, where if you believe in this, whatever, if it's linguistics, it's linguistics. If it's, consulting, it's consulting, but just like creating that content for yourself and doing it consistently, where you're basically building your own brand. People talk about that a lot. That's what I did when I was at Altos Research, that was a different startup, but there was a point where I was like, I want to kind of start thinking about building my own thing. but I didn't want to just jump because financially it didn't make sense. And it was still, leadership role there. So I actually had one of our CTO of our company. He just mentioned casually about how he was posting on Quora once a week. So he's like, oh, I'd find a question on Quora and then I'd find something and I just figured I'd try to help out other people. I was like, that's a good idea. So I started posting on Quora once a day. So I'd find a sales related question or a startup related question and I just started posting. And so some of it was like building brand, but some of it was also helping me figure out what I think. Because when I write, like writing it down helps me figure out what am I thinking about. And so now it's almost like a live journal in a sense. And oh, by the way, you're building up all of this social proof that you know what you're talking about. And it's so easy to do that. It just requires the commitment to say like, oh, I'm going to do this and seeing it through. And that's what led to, a lot of other avenues, just posting on Quora, which led to something else, which led to something else, which led to something else. And like 7 steps later, now I'm in a position where I could actually leave and run my own company. And those things take a lot of time and patience. So it was 2010 when I first decided to self-publish a book. And it wasn't until 2015 where I was in a position I could actually leave a full-time job and run this company on my own. But it just takes that sort of level of patience and understanding that just build. And even then it was like a huge risk, even after setting all that groundwork.
Yeah, you said a lot of things that really resonated. One, I don't know how we've never talked about Quora. I was a top question
Quora
writer
OG.
in 2016, like got invited to their whole thing in California, like got the fancy bag with the badge. So it was also like very much where I started creating content because you could do it with like some level of anonymity that felt safer than creating content like on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn wasn't the thing it is now. That's just an interesting overlap. But like something you said, and then Larisha, something you said I want to come back to, like you get to create some of those at bats, I think is like very much what you're trying to express, that like you need to put yourself at bat if you want those opportunities by creating content, by building relationships, whatever the case is. And it may take longer than you want it to. And if you are not going above and beyond, like, so much of the book is about accountability. If you aren't putting in that extra work to create content, build the community, do the networking, talk to the other employees, you're simply not going to get as many shots at those jobs. And Larisha, you said something that I love because I recently saw a post, I think it was from Leslie Douglas. I don't remember, but it might have even been from Courtney, who's a member of our book club. They were talking about how they got so many promotions so quickly. And a huge key to their success was that they would create projects. So they would see something and they would make it a formal project, but kind of put in their like own milestones and get approval that like it was aligned to the company vision and to bring other people in. So they would find things that needed work, but then all of a sudden they were owning these projects that they had the validation were aligned to bigger company goals. And it allowed them to get so much more visibility in front of leadership and in front of the ELT that they just kept getting these promotions like every 6 months, every 6 years. So I think that is incredible advice. And it reminds me of something else that Carla, she doesn't ever specifically name it, but I think she like skirts around it most of the book, which is the concept of managing up, which like, I don't think I ever heard the phrase managing up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I don't know if it's a new age phrase or I just missed it for the first half of my career. But I feel like managing up is something that probably all of us can do a little bit better, whether we are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, like we can all have those better conversations with the people that ultimately control our paychecks and our career growth. I'd love to hear anybody have like a top tip, like number one thing that they would do to be better at managing up.
Managing up is not giving feedback. Giving feedback is very likely a mistake in a CLM or a career limiting move. Managing up, in my view, is exploiting your boss's strengths and using your strengths to cover their weaknesses, and let them be the star where they're the star, and I'll be the star where I'm the star, and we'll get along great. I
think we're done here. Jeremy's just dropped the mic. We'll just wrap it up for the night. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Anybody, I mean, that's hard to follow up on. Anybody want to give it a stab?
Well, this kind of goes back to what we were previously talking about, people who feel like they're not getting promoted. Sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with your work ethic or your work product.
Mm,
And I'm talking about myself here, because nobody has ever, whether we're talking my former career in education or my short time that I've been in corporate, questioned that I'm good at my job. But I don't think I'm always very good at playing the political game. Whether that was in my old job with my principal or even now in a situation I'm in. And I look at people around me, and that's actually what I'm trying to still learn, which I know I'm pretty old to still be learning that, but I look at people and I'm like, well, they didn't say a word about that. Like, and I'm over here like, what about the partner experience, And so I'm just trying to figure out, I guess, because I know when to pick my battles. I do know that from when I was an educator. But I think it's really important, that managing up piece. I don't want to call it brown nosing, but part of that can be a little bit brown nosing-ish. But some of it's just knowing how to play the game, like knowing how
strategic brown nosing.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and it's not that every boss I've ever had has hated me, but there's been a few people above me that it just has not worked. And I take it very personally because I know I'm good at what I do. So, I'm sure they go home and could care less. And I'm like thinking all weekend long, so I don't know. That's an area that I still personally need to grow in, but I think it's important to recognize that some of those types of skills could be some of the things holding us back if you're in that position.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good share. It made me immediately remember this part of the book that's on page 116 about requiring relationship currency, because there are going to be like people in our reporting line that are important to us that like they don't like us for whatever reason, or they're threatened by us, or they have their own stuff going on, and having that relationship currency with folks, maybe their boss or the boss's boss or folks in other departments. There was a story that Carla shares that's like somewhere around that part of the book. That's Kelly, an employee who does exceptional work, but keeps getting passed up for promotion. And they sort of uncover that her boss doesn't really have any interest in promoting her. Like that's just not his priority. But then also that boss, like they don't have any relationship currency. So they don't have the currency to spend to get her promoted, even if they were invested in that. And I thought it was such a powerful anecdote, and it seems, kind of related to what you just shared, Liz. And I mean, I've certainly seen that in real life, and it like so deeply illustrates the importance of being intentional about relationship building. So it's like not brown nosing, right? But it's like being really strategic about building relationships and like finding shared passions, or to Jeremy's point, like figuring out how you can let other people shine. So you are a person that makes them feel really good about themselves and their contributions. And like when I was reading that part of the book, and especially that story, it made me wonder, in our current work environment where so many of us are hybrid or fully remote, or like maybe we're in person, but we're part of a distributed team, or maybe we're gig workers. Like how do you think we build that type of meaningful relationship currency when we aren't face to face, which is arguably the easiest place to build it? Any
One
takes on
thing
that?
that I miss so much. So now that I work on my own, I really miss having a boss. And I was remote before the world was on lockdown. And one thing I would do whenever we would like get off of a group call, or while we're on a group call, I'm sitting there texting him like, yo. Or when we would get off of a call, I'll call him like, oh my gosh, can you believe? So it was like things that I would normally pop up in the office like, hey, guess what? I would just do those things over the phone or do those things over Slack. So my boss knew me very well. He knew my family very well. I knew him well. I knew his family. I knew his dogs. And so we had that very close relationship. And I was hardly ever in the building, but my name was always in the building. My name was always in the right rooms because we were able to build that bond on different levels. And then whenever I was there, like he couldn't get rid of me. The CEO couldn't get rid of me. And so it's just, I definitely wasn't brown nosing, and I definitely didn't follow a lot of Carla's rules. I actually broke a lot of them. I should have read that book a long time ago, but the relationships that I was able to build, it was because I genuinely wanted those relationships, but being remote didn't keep me from being able to build those relationships.
Yeah, I think that's like very much what I found, and it seems like that's what other folks have found. I also think like we have an unfair advantage in this group because you don't join a business book club unless you are sort of innately curious as a person, and that curiosity I think makes it like it is very genuine. Like it is easier, I think, probably for the people in this room to lead with genuine curiosity, because we are people that seek to understand. Like Ellie's like, sorry, I have a question, immediate question. Like I love that. I mean, I think that's like a shared like personality quirk trait, whatever it is. Interestingly, I talked to, I don't know if y'all know Nick and Morgan at B2B Power Hour. Yeah, they're incredible. I'm obsessed with them. They are kind and smart. They check all the boxes. And I was talking to Nick this afternoon, and he just finished a huge piece of research. And one of the things that he discovered is that so like the bottom 50% of sellers, nothing new here, very product focused, right? And then you kind of go upstream a bit and people start becoming problem focused instead of product focused. The top 2% of sellers, a key differentiator is that they found deep passion to share with people. And it was the type of passion where it's a shared language, right? And so like he used the example, he's a craft beer nerd. So like anytime that he could like speak that language where if you're not in that, like you don't know. And I was like, that's so interesting because I recently did some posts about how I love fantasy books, like super nerdy, deep fantasy books. But it's like a very shared language where I then had people reach out to me that were like, oh, you Cosmere, I Cosmere. If you don't read fantasy, you don't know what those sentences mean, right? And that's now led to like 2 very, very legit sales conversations simply based on that shared language and deep passion and just like getting curious and then being honest about maybe like being weird and quirky and curious and all those things. So there's something to that. I love that. It is, you asked, so I'm going to tell you. It is this fantasy world that this guy, Brandon Sanderson, has built. And he has like over 30 books and all of them take places, it's a universe, and all of them take places in like different timelines in the universe and different parts of the universe. But the Cosmere is this whole fantasy universe. It's like deep, deep, deep fantasy world building. And I'm all in on it. And it's very nerdy. I'm on like page 5,000 of what right now is a 6-book series, and he's about ready to release book 7. Who just said that? Ellie just got, oh my God.
So Ellie, you Cosmere.
Did we just become best
Say
friends?
more. I just read the first Mistborn book earlier this year and I'm hooked.
Jeremy, you Cosmere?
Brandon Sanderson all the way.
He's brilliant. His writing, his prose is so fantastic. I love the lyricism of it. Like some writers just have a musical quality to it. And I think Brandon has that. And that's how I found him and loved him. And then got into a world that I never thought I would enjoy. So, but I have a nerdy friend who's also a lawyer.
Oh my gosh, I love it. See, like this, and then all of a sudden you see everybody's faces light up. So I think like there's something to that, and maybe it's not really like deep high fantasy Cosmere nerdiness, but there's something that lights up everybody's face, and I think that there's like enough of the overlap on the Venn diagram that like we can find like something for everybody. Okay, I know we're right at time. I have one more question, because the last part of the book is how to start over in your career if you want, right? And all me and Larisha and Scott are all working for ourselves now. So Carla said something along the lines that like made me bristle. But I think it was like that the right approach to your career is to move forward with the assumption that what is good for the team will directly benefit you. That is not what I have found in my career at all. But I think I'd love to hear your take on sort of that concept, and maybe if anybody has anything to add about like how to know when the time is right to stop being part of a team and to start creating your own team. Any final thoughts here? Yeah, Scott, please.
Thankfully, I have a really smart wife. And so there's been a couple of situations in my life where I've like want to make a move. And because she's more risk averse, she in a way is a good, yin to my yang, because she's like, you got to slow down, or like, you don't have a plan yet. Or like she said to me once, you have a plan to make a plan, but you don't have a plan. And I'm like, all right, you're right. And so it forced me to sort of take these slower, more patient steps, like writing on Quora for a while, or taking a long time to investigate how I could get from New York in the publishing world to Silicon Valley. It wasn't like, I'm just going to pack up my stuff, quit my job, pack up my stuff and move to Silicon Valley and find a job. And this is before I was married. But even then I was like, okay, I got to figure something out. And it took me like 6 months to find the right job and go through the whole process. And so I think, it's fair to feel frustrated and impatient and want to make the move. And I think it also, like, there's a certain lizard brain part of our brains where like, this sucks, I want to move. It's like a survival thing. I want to get out of the thing that makes me feel uncomfortable to something that seems to make me want to feel comfortable. But a lot of times we run away from danger into something even worse. And so that's where we have to kind of get back to, a smarter part of our brain and say, okay, look, this might suck, but let me just make sure, is it just suck because of, the last couple of weeks at work, or because of this certain job that I have to do right now, or some other reason that makes me feel unhappy at work, but maybe there's something else that's really causing it outside of work. And so if you kind of take that slower, patient approach, it gives you time to develop it and think about it and look at other options, so you don't make a rash decision. Because if you make that rash decision, sometimes you end up in just another lizard brain survival situation 18 months later. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why you see people that keep switching jobs every like 18 to 24 months. Everything always seems better. I got to get out of this job. It's not what I want. I want to move into the next thing. This one looks better. It's not about that next job being better or the job you have being worse. It's like about you knowing what you want to do and how that is going to make you happy. So it's just like slow things down in order to make sure you're making the right move.
Wise words. There's something, I saw your comment, Liz, about changing careers, and Carla kind of talks about it a little bit. But I had read a book, I don't remember what it was, a couple of months ago. I'm like terrible with book titles. I saw you finally drop The Motivation Myth, so we know what the first book was. But the claim was like, every 10 years of your life, give or take, is like a different stage of your life, which makes sense, right? Like childhood, young adulthood, or like, being a teenager, young adult. And that in that context, you should very much give yourself permission, if you want to completely reinvent yourself every 10 years. And if that means quitting your job to be a creative, deciding to become a professional chef, like completely switching careers, like then go for it, right? Our taste buds change every 7 to 10 years. Maybe we change our taste buds towards our career. I love that. While you were talking, Scott, I also pulled up this article that I wrote that were sort of my reflections of 1 year being a founder. And it's interesting because the number 2 one was I wasn't ready before now. And there is this sort of feeling, or at least I felt this pressure that I was somehow like behind, or that I wasn't as good as somebody that was an entrepreneur, like staying in my job that felt safe and felt right for me at the time somehow made me like less than. And like now having moved into entrepreneurship, it's this like surety of being like, oh my, I wasn't ready until now. Like I wasn't ready when I wasn't ready. And I'm so happy that I took it slow so that I'm not, you know, maybe not all like on the verge of having to go back and get a job because I quit my job before I was really in a position to. I know we're right at time. Any last thoughts? Any last thoughts here that anybody wants to?
I
I
think
would
these
say
meetings keep getting better. This one was the best one yet.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks for letting me join. So I know I'm the newcomer, so I appreciate
me
it.
too.
This is great.
And you too.
I would say that I've always loved ice cream as well.
I'm just gonna say like correlation, causation, you make the judgment. That's all I'm gonna say.
I am so deeply appreciative to all of you for being a part of this book club that I'm building, right? I realized I was passionate about books. I wanted to read more books. I wanted to talk about more books with other people that loved books. And it turns out has a big overlap with fantasy and the Cosmere. So I just really appreciate all of you showing up, being passionate, being curious, being on this journey together means a lot to me. So thank you and have a wonderful night. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
See you.
Everybody.
Thanks,
Good
you
night,
all.
team.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.